This is the Fixer Punk Podcast, the podcast that celebrates the past, present, and future accomplishments of the labor movement this Labor Day weekend. I'm Grayson Peltier. So, I want to discuss what I believe to be the unifying theme, or one of the unifying themes of a lot of the topics I've covered. And I want you to think about, what do you think might be in common between the Andrew Huberman health optimization folks of the world, the ancestral diet fitness experts like Liver King, personal finance experts like Dave Ramsey and Caleb Hammer, and welfare reform? Now, those things don't seem to have much in common at first glance, but there are a few very interesting key themes that I think we need to really keep an eye out for, because they are starting to define a lot of how we think about politics, how we think about others, and how we think about ourselves. Those common themes can be summed up as unreasonably high standards, rigidity, and traditionalism on a very basic level. Some of these factors make more sense in some contexts than in others, but I think they can all apply to a lot of these categories, at least to one level or another. And the end goal of this, even when these things don't come with right-wing explicit packaging that specifically labels them as conservative political ideals, the goal of these ideological underpinnings are that they don't want you to be able to trust yourself to know that there's something wrong. What they want you to do instead is they want you to trust the wisdom that they are imputing on you. The things that they are saying are the true causes of your problems. Things that are not the actual systemic causes. It is a deflection. And it all seeks to put the blame back on you. And hence, it's the way that the right very subtly influences you to hate and doubt yourself. Because if you hate and doubt yourself, then you don't believe the problem is coming from somewhere else, that the problems are coming from systemic factors. And that is exactly what they want to have happen. So, what exactly is the mechanism by which this works? If we look at, let's take the whole health optimization thing, and I discussed that in the last episode, or a couple episodes ago, the health optimization trends with the Andrew Hubermans, the Anna Lembkes of the world, and this is becoming one of the most interesting spaces in terms of this type of right-wing influence creeping in, or at the very least, these things acting and serving as a way of affirming right-wing ideology over and above systemic change, even if it's not intentional on the part of the people that are putting these ideas out there. But there is this obsession with dopamine detoxing and so-called dopamine addiction, even though that's a scientific misnomer. These people claim to be medical scientists or neuroscientists, and they're saying that people are addicted to dopamine, and that the reason why people are not doing well in the world is because they are too addicted to instant gratification. And this is a theme that, whether we're talking about fitness, whether we're talking about finance, whether we're talking about people being able to be productive in the workplace, productivity issues, workplace advancement issues of management and personal finance, this term instant gratification has been popping up literally everywhere. So I will monitor subreddits for things like personal finance influencers, and then these health optimization influencers like Huberman. And this term instant gratification and dopamine addiction has been popping up there everywhere. I also monitor a bunch of fitness subreddits, and this again, dopamine addiction and instant gratification, those words just keep coming up over and over and over again. And you'll have this theme going over and above other things that may be more relevant. And it is even getting into the narratives around homelessness and people who are the lowest and the most deprived in society. But the irony of it, and this is actually one of the clips that Jess, who did that, when I did the episode on Andrew Huberman, I mentioned Jess from that sluggishsubstack.com website. When she did that analysis, she put in there a clip with Andrew Huberman with none other than Jordan Peterson. And Jordan Peterson said that the reason why people are feeling so much distress in their lives is because they are not optimally deprived. That people are feeling emotionally deprived and sad and miserable because they haven't been deprived enough. And they operate on this assumption, especially the Anna Lembke. They operate on this assumption that people in Western societies generally have everything they need, and it is because they keep getting unearned dopamine hits, that is why they are miserable. And this theme is coming up everywhere, that basically people need to just deprive themselves further in order to be successful. And this is reminding me of some of the stuff that I've heard in religious spaces. And honestly, I was a bit skeptical because I do believe in a lot of these self-optimization, fitness, finance, a lot of these things, a lot of these techniques that these influencers talk about. I do believe that a lot of them are very, very good things. And there is some value to all of them. But then when you start injecting victim blaming and you start injecting right-wing tinged ideologies, that is wherein lies the problem. And of course, there are adaptations and other things that need to be put in there to make them work well in an individual situation. But this overall theme just keeps coming up. And they seem to... the reason why they do this is, obviously, in some of these spaces, these terms have just gotten in there through the popular discourse. But in a more insidious way, it is because they want you to always believe that you are the problem in this. They want you to believe that, okay, this can never be because the protocol is wrong. This can never be because the circumstances and the situation and the environment are wrong. It always has to be because of you. And that obviously keeps you dependent on their advice. And it keeps you constantly dependent and overthinking every decision that you make in your life. Like, I saw somebody in the Andrew Huberman forums who was saying, actually, I think I've seen multiple posts on like the Andrew Huberman subreddit saying that, can I listen to music? Am I allowed to listen to music while I'm working? Because that's going to increase my dopamine too much. And is that going to make it more difficult? I feel like it helps me, but I want to be optimal. I want to be optimized. That immediately rung a bell in my mind. As someone who has been through some overly rigid religious organizations, let's put it that way, that claim to improve your mental health and help you fix all your problems in life, there was always sort of an obsession around like music and entertainment and stuff like that, and saying that you needed to keep like non-Christian music and entertainment out as much as possible. Some subsets were a bit less rigid about it, but other ones, they caused you to have a lot of suspicion around things like music and entertainment and things that gave you pleasure in that regard because you should be focusing more on God. And that's a pretty common thing with overly conservative religious Christian ideologies. Not all forms of Christianity, for sure. There are forms that are a lot better. I'm still a Christian. I just don't agree with those types of groups any longer. But that would be a very common thing of people being scared and hyper and micro-analyzing every single last thing that they listened to or watched and being questioned about it. Here, obviously, it's not because of a religious morality, but it is because of this dopamine thing of like, okay, I have to keep my dopamine under control. And keeping my dopamine under control is going to be the key to health, happiness, and financial prosperity. And that just rung too much of a bell for me. And honestly, it makes sense. I actually came into this skeptical about Jess's claims that this was some sort of religious asceticism. because I like these things, because I like some of these ideas, because I like some physical, mental performance stuff, some of the stuff of even like try to make yourself a much stronger, more athletic, tougher person because that helps you in various areas of life. I believe in that kind of stuff. I believe in like the power of training your body to improve your mind, those kinds of things. I was skeptical of that claim that it was a form of religious asceticism. But seeing that and seeing the amount of self-doubt that these ideologies are starting to put into people, and I don't think this is necessarily intentional on the part of Andrew Huberman. I think that he has good ideas, he has some good things that I think that even could potentially be implemented in the future into policy, into our approaches to mental health and healthcare. But it is getting wrapped up with these ideas, and it is very, very clear that it is becoming this religious asceticism and about depriving yourself of all forms of pleasure, thinking that that is the solution. Meanwhile, it's not that. What I like to say is it's not dopamine addiction. The reason why people go and they do things that give them pleasure when they're in situations where maybe it will be, in theory, better for them to work harder is because they think those things are going to be futile. Because of the nature of our system, because of the nature of the system under late-stage capitalism with poor workers' rights, people do not believe that constantly working harder and harder and harder is going to yield them results. I know because I was one of those people. I was one of those people who was extremely disciplined and rigid about work, pushing myself to my absolute end, but it still really didn't get me anywhere. And that is kind of how I got this realization. Even after having a bunch of accomplishments, after graduating from one of the top universities in the country, the kind of place, USC, the kind of school that celebrities bribed people to get their children into, having some jobs in a pretty difficult field in politics, and it still wasn't enough. So it is not dopamine addiction, it is futility aversion. And they don't want you to realize that because they keep you stuck in this loop. And this is how all of these far-right ideologies work, because they keep you stuck in a loop of thinking about the things that they want you to think about, so you don't see the obvious signs all around you. You don't see the obvious signs that you're being paid too well, your boss is treating you badly, that there are issues with climate change that are having material impacts on people. They don't want you to see the fact that there are tons and tons of people becoming homeless, and that you're closer to becoming a homeless person than you are to becoming a billionaire, because if your rent goes up $500 a month, then you're going to not be able to pay your rent. They just want you to see what's in front of you, and they want you to see those people out there. Those people are morally defective. The reason why people are homeless is because they're addicted to dopamine. And unfortunately, that's even coming out on some of the Bay Area subreddits, because these ideas are so prevalent. This dopamine addiction stuff is so prevalent in the San Francisco tech community. It is leaking into the way that they're addressing homelessness, of all things. And they're like, okay, it's just because these people are addicted. And we've long seen homeless people as just being addicts. But they're just bringing it down to the microscopic level. They're like, okay, you can't afford your rent. That must be because you're sitting around and watching too much Netflix. Okay, you're not performing well at work. That's because you're spending too much time listening to music. Or the reason why you're not doing financially well is because you're stopping off at McDonald's at the end of the day to get something to eat instead of coming home and eating kale and chia seeds. So the victim blaming just keeps going up and up through further and further strata. And ideas that used to be more inclusive are getting more and more strict. And I think that one of the things that the people that turn to blame and shame, either they know it or don't want to acknowledge it, or they don't know it, is that people that are in bad situations already feel bad. It's like if people could talk back to some of these self-help ideas, they would probably say something like, they're like, people would say, I already know that I'm a bad person. You don't have to rub it in. And that's the thing is that people who are in bad situations in their lives, people who are economically disadvantaged, people who have problems in their lives are a lot smarter than the people sitting in the ivory tower, the people in the Stanford addiction lab, whatever, give them credit for. They know what is going on in their situations, and in a way they know how to solve it. They know that all of these optimal things are things that they need to improve in their lives, but they are powerless to change it in many ways. They will oftentimes try and try and try, but if it's futile, then why would they keep doing it? And if people acknowledge their own knowledge of the system, their own knowledge of their own circumstances, then that is a threat to just the central narrative that conservative ideas put out there. And it's definitely one of those things that just crosses over into a lot of areas of life. And the irony of it all is that, in a way, capitalism pretty much requires you to be consuming products and to be doing things that are not optimal. So they are creating the circumstances and the environment in which you would quote unquote slip up. And there are things that are formerly reasonable ideas that have just gotten kicked to the wayside by this whole dopamine narrative. And one of the key examples of this is like in the diet and fitness space. So in the fitness space, there used to be a whole thing of people questioning whether or not they can eat such and such a food on bodybuilding forums. And Dr. Lane Norton and a bunch of other people in the bodybuilding space came up with this term, if it fits your macros, which basically means that if it fits within your calories, protein, carbs, and fats limit for the day, given your training or your fitness goals, that you can choose a wide variety of foods, whether those be fast foods, things that are more convenient, or something that is more quote-unquote clean, because people would always be questioning themselves whether or not a food was clean enough. But nowadays in the fitness forums, I'm seeing this sort of valorization of cleaner and stricter diets and saying, okay, because you're on a stricter, the solution is just to continually cut out all the foods that you like, even if they can meet your goals, even if you might feel better eating them. The stricter and stricter diets, the all meat carnivore diets, the quote unquote no processed food, which that's such an ambiguous definition, because if you cut something, you cook it, that's processing food. And nobody likes to talk about that. It's just a spiral of self-doubt of like, is this processed? Is this clean? So even when you can use an objective standard, we're starting to see people getting away from using objective standards. And then because you are pushing people on all ends, because it used to be like you'll have in the personal finance space, you'll have somebody like, say, a Caleb Hammer, which I'm giving overarching descriptions of a lot of things here. And I'm going to go in depth into each of these categories and into more progressive left-leaning solutions in each of these categories in their own separate episodes. But you'll have a finance expert who will tell you that you need to work harder. People who will go on, say, the Caleb Hammer financial audit show, they will be told, just go work harder, work 60, 80 hours a week. Just keep working, like work. The only things you should be doing are working and sleeping. And then you'll also hear, in order to be productive and powerful and doing well in the workplace, you have to eat only unprocessed foods. And even the financial people will be like, you have to meal prep everything every week, only eat like the absolute bare minimum in terms of food, in terms of your food spending. And then also you have to do all these stuff in the morning, your morning routines, your ice baths, your cold exposure, your sun exposure. So a person hearing all of these different things from all of these different sources is being put under a tremendously crushing burden. And a lot of what these self-help people do not get is that there is even if you quote unquote have enough hours in the day to do your workouts, to do work, to meal prep everything and not stop fast food, there is a cognitive burden to this. And this is especially true for people with a mental illness or neurodivergency. There is a cognitive load to it. So just because you have an hour that you can sit aside and watch TV or listen to music or play a video game, that is not an hour that maybe you can use to do something like meal prep, workout, work extra hours, because there are different phases. That awake and asleep are not like, it's not just like awake, you can do whatever you want while you're awake, and then just asleep. There is a certain load that the human body and the human mind could take, just like a muscle would get sore. That if you're doing all these hard things constantly and every single day, all you're doing is all these hard things without a break, at some point you're going to break down. Something's going to break down. If you're spending your time, your energy on trying to improve your fitness, you're going to have less energy to deal with stuff in the financial realm. And yes, I do believe that you can train all of these up at the same time, and I do believe you can work on them at the same time. But pushing people to the absolute limit on everything all at once can backfire, because you have somebody who's working 12-hour days to try to pay off their debt. At some point, they are going to crack and they're going to wind up in the McDonald's drive-thru getting food. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The fact that we have processed foods as available as things for people that are working really, really hard actually is very important to people being able to be productive, because if people have to worry so much about what they're going to eat and having to prepare it all in advance, we wouldn't be as productive as a society. And there's some interesting arguments around how we subsidize processed foods, so that like meat will be less expensive than vegetables in certain cases, and things are being subsidized by the government that maybe shouldn't be. A guy on TikTok, Frenchie, who's more of a socialist content creator, he talked about the way food is subsidized and how processed food plays into productivity. And I think that's a very important thing to take a look at, because as much as the gurus, especially Mr. You have to have a six-pack abs in order to work for my company, would say that productivity is only achieved by eating clean, productivity is being enabled by these fast foods and convenience and processed foods, which then also the finance people will judge you for, because you're spending too much money on it. And they want you to believe that poor people don't deserve to be happy. And that's what this whole avoiding instant gratification thing is. They're like, okay, poor people don't deserve to be happy. They need to be punished. And that is also, so you're going in and then physically punishing yourself with ice baths and all this other stuff, which can be helpful if you're doing it on your own because you want to, because there's something you want to do in your life. Very positive things. But a lot of this is basically just punishing you and saying, well, if you're poor, you don't deserve to be happy. And guess what? That is the central message of welfare reform. Welfare reform is like, if you're poor, you don't deserve to be treated well in any way. You don't have a right to housing. You don't have a right to food. You don't have a right to shelter. You have to go and work for it. Oftentimes, you have to work unpaid. You have to be forced into low-wage positions, even when you have a good education, good experience. I linked to a few episodes ago that marketplace series, The Uncertain Hour, about welfare reform. And there are like motivational speeches and stuff like that, stuff that some of these motivational people would probably approve of, but it's part of the government's attempt to get you off of welfare. They're like, okay, you have to take a low-wage job to try to push you into those things. They don't let you hold out maybe a little bit longer to get a good job that's more in line with your experience. They just want to throw you into a job, any job, as quickly as possible. And as much as these people like to say that they are against distractions, like especially the self-optimization, they're like, no distractions. That's why I don't watch movies, I don't watch TV. And there are people constantly judging themselves, again, for things as simple as listening to music while working. Nonetheless, watching TV, watching movies, or God forbid somebody plays video games. But it's because they want to distract you from using your power and from withholding your labor. They want you subservient, because if you're not distracted by all of this hard work that's going to make you more successful and make you better than everybody else, then you might decide to unionize and organize your workplace. You might decide to vote differently. You might decide to become a candidate. You might decide to run for a public office. You might decide to go to a city council meeting. You might decide to question the system that you are in. But instead, they want you attacking other people. And they want you to not see the ways that they are setting up to fail. They depend on you to spend. So you have the personal finance gurus out there who are telling you, spend less money, spend less money, spend less money. And you know who I'm impersonating there? Dave Ramsey. But they're also the ones pushing the return to office thing. They're pushing like, okay, you have to return to office. And you want to know what the motivation is for that? Getting you to spend more. In the words of a lot of like local government leaders and business leaders, they want you to be back into the downtowns. Save our downtowns. But you know what saving our downtowns means? Making sure that you go in and while you're stressed out because you had to commute 2 hours and you only have 30 minutes for lunch, going and running in and buying that $10, $15 sandwich at some restaurant downtown, which these businesses, obviously I have sympathy for them, but if you're going to push people and tell them you need to be spending less, one of the ways that you can spend less is by not having to spend money on commuting, by not having to spend money. And yeah, of course, Caleb Hammer and those folks, they're going to judge you and they're going to say, no, pack a lunch, just pack a lunch. But if everybody did that, are we actually saving the downtowns? Are we doing the things that capitalism wants us and needs us to do? And the reason why they're doing it, they're doing choice architecture around us so that we make the wrong decisions, to make it easier to make the wrong decisions than it is to make the right decisions. Because if you're working at home, it's a lot easier for you to walk downstairs or to your kitchen and get yourself lunch than it is for you to have to make sure that that's all packed ahead of time as you're rushing out and try to make sure you're not going to run into traffic because you need to be in the office on time. So they're making it more difficult to make the good choices that they want you to make. And there's also sort of this thing of claiming that the suffering is temporary. They will say, well, you just have to suffer for 2 or 3 years while you pay down your debt. This is especially true with the finance ones, is you have to suffer for 2 or 3 years while you pay down your debt. But it's not going to be 2 or 3 years because they always have this assumption, and they even make up these things like you're going to have $5-10 million. They always assume that nothing's ever going to happen to you, that your family member's not going to get sick, that you're not going to get sick, that you're not going to lose a job, that something's not going to go wrong in the middle of that. And they always assume that your income is going to somehow go exponentially up without doing something like labor organizing or even just withholding your labor, staying out of the job market to make sure that the job market starts to work with the demands of workers. The simple fact that people stood out of the job market a lot during the pandemic started to influence employers, not through a formal general strike, but through, I guess, sort of more of an informal general strike. It started to influence employers to do things that they wouldn't have done before. But now, because everybody's being pushed back in to work and return to office and all this stuff, it's not working as well. And it's not going to be temporary. For somebody who is stuck in a dead-end, low-wage job, the suffering is not going to be temporary. Yeah, they can tell you, oh yeah, you have to go onto this website and learn all these skills. Okay, if you don't have energy during the day, make sure that before you go to your shift at McDonald's, you get yourself into your ice bath, you get your sun exposure, you take now you're going to have to go and you're going to have to charge up your credit cards to get your AG1, your athletic green supplement and all that, so that at the end of the day you can come home and learn how to code. Maybe there's going to be some very, very small percentage of the population that can do that. But again, the cognitive load of that is a lot more than people would want you to believe. And the thing is that even like we talk about like elite athletes who are like the first people to adopt all kinds of performance stuff and these performance ideas, they're now going into like the mainstream wage laborer. They get tons of breaks, or at least they get some breaks where they can recover from all these things. The summation of a lot of the self-help is just to go ad infinitum and not have a break, and that's just not the overwhelming majority of people just can't tolerate that. And then that just sends you back to blaming yourself, and because you're so busy, always feeling like you need to do more is a source of so-called distraction, and that distraction is leading you away from the thing they're trying to distract you from, which is the systems around you that are causing the problems. And then you have these unattainable standards around there. And you do have these things that keep going around, and it just keeps going and going around until at some point you either you may start to see the problems in the system, but just as soon as you start to see the problems in the system, they have yet another deflection. They have another distraction. That other distraction is blaming others. I explained on the economic police state episode how they want you to enforce these norms against each other. And that's the common thing, because like with the people talking about dopamine addiction, dopamine detoxing, these are like random people online who are like keep spreading these ideas against others. So if you see somebody that's in hardship, your response is not, let's help them. Let's do some mutual aid. Let's try to help organize to get better housing. Let's try to organize to get better healthcare in our community. Your first reaction is, no, you're wrong because you're not working 80 hours a week. You're not working hard enough. You're eating junk food, which is making you unproductive and it's taking money out of your wallet. You just need to cut out all the bad habits, stop being addicted to dopamine, and then you can do better financially too. Meanwhile, the person writing that comment is in an apartment that they can barely afford, has crushing student loan debt, and is working a ton of time to not have anything to enjoy in life. But they have you enforcing that against others. The cruelty is the point. And they want you to enforce that point on others. And there's always going to be another insult that they're going to use. People, and when you're talking about politics, there are always like little shorthand things that people come up with, and so that you can have that instant knee-jerk quick response. And the one that I've seen, especially in the finance space, is that Caleb Hammer uses this one a lot. And again, I don't believe that a lot of these people are ill-intentioned. They're just falling into traps and ideas that maybe they don't even know are influencing them. But the one that I see him using is saying that people are childish. Like, even if people are doing okay, he'll use the term childish to describe them. So they will have you believe that anybody who wants a better system is somebody that is childish. So that, okay, that's bad. So you automatically, as soon as you make that connection, then it's something that's bad. They're like, childish. I don't think that it is a coincidence that this victim blaming narrative, this narrative of people blaming each other, the fact that we're seeing the rise in dopamine addiction coming up as a primary cause of people not being successful, as the primary cause of health challenges. This narrative around instant gratification being the cause of our financial problems, just as people are being pushed to return to office and being pushed into those habits and being pushed into spending more money because of the way the system is influencing them. And we're seeing even like some of the religious mental health stuff still going around, even though that's been around forever. The religious mental health approaches that basically want you to seek out whatever secret sin is inside of you, whatever thing and that little problem inside of you that is causing all of your problems, and not causing you to look at your real problems and not letting you see what is causing you to actually be under mental distress, but then always blaming you for some sort of sin, which those things hurt me quite a bit. There were a lot of problems in my life that were being caused by economic inequality, by problems in political systems, which even me as somebody with political experience and knowledge, because these religious mental health things make you believe that all of this is things that you have somehow merited because you did something wrong and you don't even know what you did wrong. And that's the same thing with these dopamine addiction things. It's like, okay, all these innocuous things like listening to music while working, you're like, now I guess this is my fault. Maybe the reason why I'm not getting promoted at work is my fault because I listened to music while I was working, but my coworker over there wasn't, and he was super focused and he only ate kale and chia seeds, and maybe that's why he is doing a little bit better than I am economically. Honestly, it feels too ironic. It feels too ironic that these things are coming up just as we are going into the possibility of a recession. Because then, and as we're seeing conservative political ideas trying to come back as well, We're seeing a resurgence of conservative ideas kind of pushing back against the somewhat more liberal, more leftist progress we've seen during COVID and the agreement on universal social programs that we saw through the COVID era. So that now we can replace that solidarity with bickering against each other and blaming ourselves. And I hope that people can see that. And that's one of the goals here is I want you to know that you know more about your situation and about the challenges of your fellow man than people that are in power would want you to believe. And that means that you can start to think of solutions and you can start to think of ways to advocate, whether in your workplace or politically, for change and for the things that you know deep down are the problems that are causing you and others to fail. And don't believe them when they try to even in the personal finance spaces, in many cases, it's the commenters on the Caleb Hammer videos that trash people more than Caleb himself, but they'll trash on people's accomplishments. And that is, again, it's because they don't want you to believe that your opinions are worthwhile. And the people who make these comments, I don't think that they're necessarily thinking about things on a systemic or political level, but it's a mindset, it's an attitude that very, very subtly influences people to stop thinking about others and other people that are especially people who are maybe in a little bit of a lesser situation than they are, as valid sources of information, and it is to invalidate their experiences. And that's the last thing we want to do. We don't want people's experiences to be invalidated because, again, people are experts on their situation and on their community situation. And that type of expertise needs to be validated. It needs to be acknowledged. It needs to be listened to. And it needs to go into when we're thinking about how to change public policy. What I want to end here on is that self-help and these types of things, improving your finances, improving your fitness, improving your health, doing productivity optimization, these things can help you. These tools, the tools and the ideas behind them can help you, but we have to get them in conversation with communities and marginalized communities and with the native knowledge of marginalized communities and with systemic ideas. We have to get the individual self-help ideas in conversation with the systemic ideas. We need to get them to work with each other. The solution is not to completely discard the idea of becoming a better person. The solution is to get these ideas to work with each other instead of against each other. I don't know if the people who are pushing these ideas right now are open to that because they may be entrenched in conservative ideologies. Maybe some of them aren't. But the goal here is to bridge the divide between personal and social change. And we want to set up a situation where maybe we can use some of these ideas. Maybe we can use some of the ways to improve your finances. Maybe we can use fitness. Maybe we can use training yourself, becoming stronger, becoming a better person through fitness. Maybe we can use some of these health optimizations and ways of having a better diet as ways to become better people individually, which will help us to cope a bit better with all of the stresses that the oppression of late-stage capitalism causes, but not in a way that blames us or distracts us from the overall goal of creating systemic change. So to create a more progressive form of self-help, there are 5 main points that I just want to briefly go over. So we want it to be positive. We want it to be that you can create a better future for yourself, and that's positive toward the person, not negative or blaming the person or shaming the person. So a positive attitude toward the people. Inclusive, we want to include the experiences of diverse communities, not just the single individual urban white male wealthy software engineer tech bro who is the apparent reference person for a lot of this self-help stuff. We want to be inclusive of multi-generational households, families where decisions are made a little bit more collectively, cultures that have a different view of things like mental health and of health in general, and where people are not as atomized. And maybe these sort of highly individualistic ideas will not work as well. We want to be inclusive of those communities. We want to be inclusive of people of differing abilities, people who have disabilities and their unique needs. We want to be inclusive so that they can custom design these things to work with their lives. And that's the next point. We want to be empowering, want to empower people to be able to say, well, I can make the food that I have here. I can make the kind of food that I want to have, that I like to have. I can make it work with my diet and my fitness plan. I can make the fact that maybe I only have like 2 or 3 days a week to get into the gym. I can make that work and not guilt people. Empower them to find unique solutions that work for them. And some of these self-help people do mention it. And I think Huberman even mentions that you can kind of customize protocols. But I think that narrative needs to be more prominent. The empowering narrative, empowering people to make their own decisions and create things that work well for them, their circumstances, their culture, their community. Then we need to have a systemic focus. We need to think about the systems that make it harder for you to save money, the systems that make it harder for you to eat healthy, the systems that make it harder for you to find time to work out and do all kinds of mental health practices, the systems that make some of the underlying problems behind this worse. We need to think about those things, and we need to have a lens of how can we make things systemically create a better environment overall that allows people to have better habits in their lives. Because you'll hear like the atomic habits, those types of people, they're like change your environment. But many people have an environment that is pretty fixed and determined by outside and external factors. So we want to think about how to create systems that support people in becoming their best self. And we want to be supported. So of course, self-help is something that you do within yourself, but I think that we need to broaden that out. We need to do it on a more mutual and collective approach, more of like a mutual aid type approach, where people have supports. Like I was listening to a podcast about an approach, this group called the Camden Coalition that was helping people to improve their health by having like nurses and social workers, getting them connected to resources, people that would come to their homes and help them to learn ways to manage their health. When we talk about like these sort of like performance practices, these health practices, personal finance practices, maybe have a system where you have somebody who is working alongside of you, supporting you, helping you along the bumps on the road, and maybe not have it be so expensive. I would love to have almost like a mutual aid group working on self-improvement and personal development practices in an inclusive and flexible way, but with some support, somebody there to help you along the way, people who are in a difficult situation, who can't necessarily have all the initiative to think of everything themselves and just follow through on a gigantic list of protocols. Have some of that more individual support come alongside you. Running out of time for this episode, I will go more into my vision for each of these categories as I cover each of these individual categories a little more on future episodes. If you have any feedback at all on this episode, please feel free to call in if you want to share from your own personal development journey, your own journey of helping others, any of your stories, questions, comments. Leave a voicemail, 844-477-PUNK, 844-477-7865. Also, follow on social media at FixerPunk, FIXERPUNK on TikTok and Instagram, at Grayson Nation on Twitter or X. And I hope you will join me again for the next episode. This podcast is not professional advice of any sort. This content is for entertainment and general informational purposes only. We do not warrant or guarantee the accuracy of the information herein. The listener should not rely solely upon such and consult a competent professional before deciding to follow any course of action. If any medical or mental health concerns are suspected, please promptly contact a qualified physician.